So now what I'd like to do is introduce our next speaker, our outstanding alumni recipient. Our 2022 outstanding alumni recipient is Jacqueline Dace. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Social Science in 2005. Jacqueline is the Executive Director with St. Louis Artworks in St. Louis, Missouri. She previously served as the Deputy Director of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, Director of the Internal Affairs and Interim Executive Director of the National Blues Museum here in St. Louis, Project Manager for the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, Collections Manager at the DuSable Museum of African American History in Chicago, Curator of the African American History at the Missouri Historical Society, Adjunct Professor of Afro-American Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. He was very impressive. Dace is the recipient of the Hollywood Black Film Festival and Kansas City Film Festival Awards, as well as the National Art Strategies Fellowship. She participated in the inaugural Public History Institute, developed by the Gilder Lehman Center for Study of Slavery, Resistance, Abolition, and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which was held at Yale University. She served as practitioner for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Racial Equity Program and graduated from the Jackson Division of the FBI Citizens Academy. She was selected to participate in the first American Express Women in Music Leadership Academy at New York City and is a recipient of the Ohio Valley Regional Emmy for her documentary Mandela Prepared to Die. Dace is a current board member for the Association of African American Museums. Please give a warm welcome for Jacqueline Dace.
Thank you all. It kind of appears as if I can't keep a job. I am so happy to be here with you all. Thank you to the College of Arts and Sciences, to Dean Helsizer for this great opportunity, and thank you the most to all of you graduates, because without you, my presence here would have absolutely no purpose. Congratulations on your next step towards your future. This is truly an amazing experience, something that I never imagined that I would do, and trust me, I have an extensive imagination. Throughout my life, I asked myself how I ended up here from there. My there started in a small town in Centerville, Illinois, which is really only about a 20-minute drive from here. However, it would be my guess that many of you have never heard of that city, and far less have ever been there. In today's terminology, I would have fallen into the category as coming from an underserved, underprivileged community. In the world's view, we didn't have much, but in my view, we had a heck of a lot. I had parents that loved and cared for me, siblings that looked out for me, and a community that embraced me. I had a place that allowed me to grow and to be the person that I am today. In that underserved, segregated community, I learned to appreciate what I had, and that's where the seeds were planted that taught me to care about those that had less. I am the sixth of 6 children. My siblings and a few friends would claim that I was spoiled, but it's always best just to ignore them. Both my mother and father were born and raised during extreme segregation at the height of Jim Crow in the state of Mississippi. My mother completed her high school education, but my father only made it through 3rd grade. After the death of both of her parents, my mother moved to St. Louis from Tupelo, Mississippi, with her aunt. My father was forced to leave Pachuta, Mississippi, after his life was threatened after getting into a fight with a white man. His travels first took him to Canada before returning to the States and finding work here in St. Louis. It was here that he met and married my mother, raised his family, and worked for 36 years for Coca-Cola. Thank you. Thank you for applauding my father. I share this because they are my foundation, the ground on which I grew. Everything that I am, whatever I have achieved and whatever trajectory the road of life leads me to travel. It is all because of the base that they gave me that I firmly believe that children can only give back the food that they are provided. And even though my parents died when I was at an early age, they fed me and my siblings the best that they had. Allow me to pause here for just one moment because I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Because in the words of Langston Hughes, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. But just like many of you, I really have tried my best to keep climbing. There have been times when I simply didn't believe that life was fair. It certainly didn't seem fair when my mother died when I was 11 years old, or when our home burned the next year, leaving me and my youngest brother to roam from place to place until a couple of years later, my father purchased a house. It wasn't fair when my oldest brother died a few years later, and then the next year we lost my father. But let me tell you a secret. I truly learned from all those tragedies and losses. Somehow I was strengthened and realized that life had thrown me some of the worst it could muster, and yet I was still standing. I still had hope. I still looked to the future. I also learned not to say, what else you got? Because as the last 2 years have taught us, there's always more. I forever leaned on the lyrics from this old gospel song that I heard several times as a kid. Trouble don't last always. Weeping may endure for a night. Keep the faith. It will be all right. All of this doesn't tell you how I got here from there, so I better skip a few decades or we will be here all night, and I'm sure you have other plans. The direction of my life changed in 1992 when I entered the museum field 30 years ago. It wasn't anything glamorous, and I wasn't looking for a career. I was looking for a job. My first job was with the Missouri Historical Society as a receptionist security officer. Because of my prior experience working as a secretary, a hotel operator, and with the Better Business Bureau in the complaint department, I was an exceptional receptionist. And because of my personality, I was the absolute worst security officer. In addition to my aversion to every day wearing a polyester uniform, I just couldn't see myself physically confronting anyone. Fortunately, my supervisor understood that if I ever had to engage with someone, that the best I could do was to call 911 once I reached a safe destination. While security was not my strong suit, I was able to find a path within the institution that led to a career. Thinking back, the greatest impacts on my life were the people who believed in me. A couple of people that encouraged me to complete my degree were a historian and a friend and a mentor, Mary C. Matter, and Martha Cole, a very good friend and the previous editor with Gateway Heritage Magazine. Recalling a conversation that I had with Martha about returning to school, I said, I will be in my 40s by the time I finish. And she looked at me and said, you're going to be in your 40s anyway. You may as well be in your 40s with a degree. I couldn't argue that point. And it was Sina Cole, Martha's mother, and an anthropologist here at Webster University, who gently guided me through returning to college as an older working adult. The completion of my degree allowed me to be promoted at MHS to my final position with them as curator of African American collections and to serve as adjunct professor at Washington University. Now, I have to skip a few more years and bypass my time in Chicago to share with you the experiences that forever changed me. This was the time that I spent in Mississippi. My time in Mississippi working on the building of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum is where I met and got to know my heroes and sheroes of the movement. These were the people that I had studied and or taught about over the years. Among the many, it was during this stint that I was able to spend time with Mrs. Merle Evers, the wife of slain civil rights activist Medgar Evers. Prior to meeting her, I met and became very good friends with her daughter, Rena. My first time being in the presence of Mrs. Evers was during a cultivation meeting to encourage her to donate her collection to the museum. Let me set the stage. Our advisory committee was in the conference room, and the members consisted of 2 former Mississippi governors, Haley Barbour and William Winter, 2 state senators, and the first and second African American Supreme Court justices of Mississippi. Mrs. Evers enters the room, and for me, no one else existed. She had recently performed for the first time at Carnegie Hall, and she had given the invocation for President Obama's second inauguration. I was literally on cloud 9. After Mrs. Evers was seated, I gave my presentation, focusing all of my attention on her. She asked a few questions, others started to talk, and a few minutes later, she finally agreed to donate her collection. It was at this point when she looked across the room and looked across the table at me and said, "Baby, why do you keep smiling at me?" I just shook my head and said, "You don't get it. You just don't get it." A few months later, and after I became closer to the family, I was asked to introduce Mrs. Evers in Tupelo, where she received a Lifetime Achievement Award. I relate the story of our first meeting and ended up saying that she didn't understand that I had known her my entire life, that I was simply amazed to find myself in her presence. That same year, Rena invited me to her home for Christmas dinner, and I arrived with desserts and found Rena in the kitchen, and I asked her what I could do to help. She said, "All I want you to do is go in the living room and talk to your mama." I said, "Come on, Rena, I know you need some help." She said, "I do. I need you to go in the living room and talk to your mama." She said, "It's your time now." So I went and sat on the floor next to Mrs. Evers, and we started talking. At some point, she realized that I was on the floor, and she said, "Baby, don't sit there. Go get you a chair." I said, "No." The more I insisted, the more I refused, and I finally said, "You still don't get it. You still don't know who you are. For the rest of my life, I can tell the story about how I sat at the knee of Merle Evers." She just looked at me and smiled and said, "I'm just Merle." Now, I must fast forward a few years ago when I was invited to participate with the American Express Women in Music Leadership Seminar in New York. At the end of the seminar, each of us received a year of executive coach training. During my first meeting, I told my coach about my conversations with Mrs. Evers and telling her that she didn't know who she was. My coach paused and looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You don't know who you are." She said, "We got to choose who we would coach, and I researched you. I've read your background, and you don't know who you are." That shocked me. I didn't know what to say, but I knew she was right. Now I stand here, and my job as executive director with the St. Louis Artworks allows me to work with young people as they are at their earliest stages on the path to life. I get to share with them my story and tell them a few of my life's lessons. I tell them my ups and my downs, my mistakes and my successes. And one thing that I share with them that I'll leave with you all today is what really has made a difference in my life. Allow people to believe in you. And if you do nothing else, do your best to get out of your own way so you can find out who you are.
I want to thank Jacqueline for speaking and very inspirational speech. And I hope all of you get a chance to check out your website for St. Louis Artworks. And if you want some service, give her a buzz. And this is for